Hello and welcome to my workshop. Today I'm making a plaster cast for the top on this old German violin restoration. This violin came to me for a full restoration, which will include all the setup process, pegs, bridge, sound post, new strings and those sorts of processes. One of the main issues with this instrument though is that it's had a crack right down the full length of the top, which has been previously repaired. However, the arching of the top plate has distorted within that repair process, and that requires us to make a plaster cast to correct the arching. So the first step in that process was to remove the top of the instrument. So that's the top off the instrument. You can see here the old glue from the crack. The crack started all the way up here, ran down and down here. There was no reinforcing done on the inside, and that's the inside of the instrument. It actually had two Amati copy labels on it. So what's involved with correcting the arching of this top plate is first to make a plaster cast of the plate as it is, then a series of processes that enable me to correct the imperfections. The plaster cast mould is made up of a 3-layer sandwich of 12mm or 1/2 inch plywood. Then we have 50mm or 2-inch high density foam board, and finally the third piece, or the bottom or the top, whichever way it's going to be, is another piece of the 1/2 inch or 12mm plywood. I also have a third piece of plywood cut, and this one forms we cut a violin shaped insert which will strengthen the cast and provide clamping surface and support. I've taken the piece of foam. It needs to be firm enough to form a dam to hold the plaster inside it. I've used sourced a piece of high density insulation foam from a builder's supplies, along with the same place I got the ply. From there, with a flat piece of foam, I've then traced out a rough shape of the top of the violin and gone oversize, roughly sort of 1/2 inch or 12mm. I just guessed oversize. I've also left space at the top here if I'm doing a back plate to allow for the button of a back plate, which would protrude a bit higher. So I've left space in that so I can use this mould for either a top or a back plate. So I've traced that out, cut it out on the bandsaw, taken the same shape and cut it out, but that roughly 1/2 inch smaller, so more exact to the size of the instrument. Violin that will sit on what will be the bottom of the plaster cast and provide some support to the finished cast. Next steps from here will be to drill probably 5 holes in this piece of ply, and they will allow the plaster to squeeze out a little. They'll also provide some clamping areas. Taking the hole saw insert out, these will be fairly large holes. It doesn't have to be exact positioning, just giving myself a rough position for these holes. 2 in the top, we'll put 1 in the middle, and then we'll put 2 in the bottom, roughly evenly sort of spaced. You want to go sort of closer to the edges to allow your clamps access. And we'll just mark out roughly in the middle of each a guide for the starting point for the hole saw. Hole saw together. goes in the drill. So we'll make a start on each hole from one side, and then I'll flip it over and finish the holes from the opposite side. That way we don't get a heap of breakout. That way we have a clean cut on both sides of the board. I'll go through now and finish the other 4 holes and be back with you shortly. So I've finished cutting the holes in that support piece. I've got 5 holes in there. I'll now just take a piece of sandpaper, clean up the edges of the holes, the edges of the saw cuts from the bandsaw. On all the pieces of wood, we'll just take some sharp edges off and clean everything up. So after vacuuming up all the toxic dust and mess from the plywood, next step on this is to line the inside of the foam cutout with, well, I use packing tape, and that's just to prevent the plaster from sticking to the mould itself, so you can remove the mould afterwards. Like so, should be fine. Next step from here, take a pencil and just line the foam up roughly on the back where you like it, in the center, and roughly trace the inside shape so that when we put the violin top or back down, we know whereabouts it's going to sit. Take our top plate in this case and we position it in the middle of the mould area. You can use a little hide glue to glue the plate down. I would prefer not to, so I'm going to try and do that without doing that in this situation. Next step from here, once we have the top plate in place, or the back, is to cover it with either plastic or a rubber sheet. If it gets too thick, if the sheet gets too thick, then the difference between the plaster, mould and the top plate becomes greater. The problem with too thin a piece of plastic or rubber is that it gets creases in it, and it's important to try to get the creases out. So what the idea will be to put a piece of plastic over. I'm using a garbage bag actually in two here. I was going to try a painter's drop sheet because the plastic was thicker. However, it's got a textured surface to it. It's got a dimpled textured surface, so it's not going to work. And then pop our mould piece back over the top. So from here I will clamp the foam mould on top and go around and remove as many of those creases from the plastic as I possibly can. And then we'll come back to you once that process is complete. I've already put the, as you can see, 3 clamps around, pulled the plastic / rubber sheet tight over the top of the instrument. So I'm just putting the last clamp in place. You can use more clamps around the mould if you need it. I'll see how this goes for now. And then one other trick you can do is to use tape just to pull the sheet through and tuck it underneath, and just use a little packing tape to tape it from underneath, and that can help stop any creases forming over the instrument. So this is the setup that I use to actually do the pouring of plaster of Paris over the mould. I've got the water plaster set up, drop sheet on the floor, and the mould set up down low to make it easier to pour. The quantities that I'm going with, I've got 3 kilograms of plaster of Paris, 2.4 litres of water. That will give me a sort of 80 millilitres of water to 100 grams of Paris mix, which is on the stronger side. So I don't have much time with the plaster of Paris. Once I start mixing it and going through the process, it starts to go off quite quickly. So I've just got to get on with the process. I won't do very much commentary while I'm doing it, and I'll just get started now. It's getting smoother. It's getting better. Okay. To pour it soon. It's feeling smoother. Okay, so it doesn't, I'm not feeling any lumps down the bottom of it anymore. It's feeling smooth and should be pretty much ready to pour. Starting at one end of the instrument. I'll leave a little gap at the top here to press plate in. And that will give the mould some support once it's dried. Seeing as that wants to pop off, just going to pop a weight on that just to hold it down. Give this about 20 minutes to half an hour to go off. You need to be careful because it does get hot as it warms up. Plaster warms up. You need to ensure that you don't let it get too hot on the top of the instrument, on the top plate. So monitor it as it goes. Give it maybe 20 minutes. As soon as you feel the plaster is firm enough to hold its own, we will go through the process of flipping the whole cast over and taking the top out. Okay, so I've left this for 30 minutes approximately, and that's based on the visual context of how quickly the plaster was drying. It's reasonably firm while still being moist, but it will hold its own. So as not to leave the top in too long. The next step will be to remove the clamps, put the piece of ply on what is currently the top of the mould, and to finish the sandwich, and then flip it over and take what is currently the bottom, but will be the new top, off, and take the top plate out of the mould. This piece of ply that we cut in the shape of the violin that was pressed in the top, it, as you can see, gets pressed right into the plaster and form a supportive mesh within the mould. So without further ado, we will take the clamps off. Piece goes on top. And the moment of truth. Off, you can feel the heat in there, but the top plate is in okay condition. And then we have the mould once the plastic has been removed. It's come up really quite well. You can see the beautiful the outline of the F holes here, both sides. You've also got the line from where the crease line from the crack, and you can see where it steps and then the unevenness of the original repair. So that's what we're going to come in and correct. There is some creasing here from the plastic layer creasing. Would have been nice for that to not be there, but that won't affect my ability to correct the arching, largely because of how it's almost at 90 degrees to the angle of the curvature. So a very usable mould, and we'll now let that dry for 5 to 7 days before we take the plaster out of the mould completely and continue on from there. Okay, so let's just get this thing off. I'll just cut the tape that's been holding the two halves together, and this can be a little tricky sometimes. Fingers crossed that the tape that lined the mould overall is enough to, here we go, starts to pop out of there. And there we go. Because we lined the inside with tape, it doesn't grip to the plaster so much. So the mould comes off, and we're left with a usable plaster cast of the top plate. Yeah, so I'll clean that up a little and get to work on the next steps.